Remind me how long you've been with your agency. When did you get established, and how long you've been building that for?
I started in '09, and this started as a side gig. So over 15 years. But it took me about 4 years to go from a side gig, basically, to a full-time career. So I left my corporate career in 2013 to do this full-time, but the beginning started in 2009.
How many clients do you average at any given time? It may fluctuate a lot, but is there a number you try to maintain, or is it just sort of totally depends on what
So
people need?
I would say we've been constantly growing. So I would say roughly, I would say like 40-ish, about 40 businesses or so. And it sometimes it varies. Sometimes we have like some smaller companies, like more smaller companies. Sometimes we have less bigger companies. But I would say about 40, maybe up to 50 range. But I would say right now closer to 40.
How many? You've got some W-2s and some 1099s, a little bit of both in terms of the team.
Yeah. So basically, right now we have about, let me see. So right now there's 10 W-2s. We also have, let's see, 4 1099s. So basically about 15, I'm sorry, 14 team members. Where right now we're looking for a couple more team members, a couple more W-2s, and as far as W-9s, probably we'll have to think about them on a needed basis.
What services do you offer?
Mostly we're focused on Google Ads. So I would say we're heavily focused on paid search, and typically Google Ads does most of the paid search. There's a sliver of Microsoft, but Google has about 90% share of market share compared to about 10% of Microsoft. But mostly it's Google Ads and analytics. We do social ads as well, but that side is smaller. Typically, it's more of a supplemental for the paid search campaigns for the businesses that we work with. So I would say that 80% is paid search, 20% is paid social. And of course, both sides have analytics to support in order to drive revenue and gross profit for these businesses.
When you say analytics, is that strictly Google Analytics, or are you using other types of software in the background of these sites as well?
Mainly Google Analytics, GA4, but we also check data against the platform data as well. I'm sure you're aware of the privacy laws and other things that even for example, like Shopify may not match 100% what you may see in Google Analytics, but Shopify, for example, has data that is much more accurate than analytics, right? Because analytics would report revenue that has happened, but Shopify would be a lot more accurate because not only it would take that revenue, but it would account for canceled orders, right? Because you can order something, Google Analytics will take that and will mark it as a conversion, as an order with an associated revenue. But if it was canceled, a few hours later, guess what? Google GA4 will not adjust that, right? Then there are fraudulent orders, so that could be happening. Also, a lot of e-commerce businesses have returns, so that would be reflected in this revenue calculation as well. So overall, we look at both GA4 and the platform data to really help us understand what the situation is. I'll add maybe another thing that is actually interesting, especially for businesses that sell higher ticket items. And by higher ticket items, I mean probably anything above $500, sometimes over $1,000. There are a lot of phone orders that do come in, and what happens is that whenever a customer service rep talks to a customer, they may take a credit card over the phone. So there was traffic that was registered, but that conversion that registered that particular order did not necessarily happen, right? Because the credit card was taken over the phone, and Shopify, for example, data, or BigCommerce, or Magento data, it would reflect that sale, but Google Analytics 4 would not Same thing with, for example, Google Ads or even Meta Ads data. That transaction would not be reflected. It's kind of invisible. So that's why we look at a few different platforms for different sets of data to ensure that we understand the full picture.
Do your clients record those manually, those phone conversions? Is there a way? I don't know if it's so important that you see those in your traffic analytics as much as maybe the client's sort of bottom line for their own P&L. Does that factor into the process? I mean, are you concerned with that as far as the work that you do, or is that just more so for them to worry about?
So it depends on the client, and I would say some clients do, some clients don't. We always encourage that, but not every client is willing to take and allocate extra resources for that. There are two ways to approach it. One way is that some platforms have a direct integration into Google Ads, and this can be done automatically. In other cases, we need to do it manually. So the manual approach is a bit more time consuming. So typically what happens is that you need a call tracking software in order to track phone calls. What we typically do is that we find we create a centralized location where everybody sees the phone calls. So let's say, somebody calls, we log the phone call that came from Google Ads data. Then the clients sees that, or like their reps see that information, and then they can match it against the phone calls. So for example, if it's Joe Smith, and then, their number, the client would say, hey, I actually sold this to Joe Smith, and the total transaction value was $5,000. So they will mark that in the spreadsheet, and then we have automation set up that we can send the data back to Google and reflect all of those changes. Now, marking that data and going through the phone records and sales records can take time. So some companies that do have the resources, they do that. Companies that don't, they kind of leave it there, and then they say, hey, on average, I get 10 or 20% of sales that do come from phone sales that are not tracked anywhere.
What platforms are the most common? Like, do you only limit yourself to? I assume the platform doesn't matter very much, but do you say we only serve Shopify and BigCommerce sites, or are you not? I guess one, are you concerned about the platform itself, and two, like what percentage of platforms are used in terms of your clients? Like what are like the big two or the big three that are the most common?
We don't concern ourselves too much on the platform. So, if it's let's say, it doesn't mean, for example, like if somebody comes with Shopify platform, it's not kind of a deal breaker for us. It's not necessarily better business. We do look at the business factors that are in play. That's the primary factor to look at. And by business factors and kind of like, I guess, or business fundamentals, what I mean is the business has to have a strong product catalog. That's one requirement. And depending on the scale, they have to have enough products to sell. Two, we look at them, and then we want them to have a product market fit, making sure that there's a demand for those products. Those products are established, that customers typically buy them. Third, we want to make sure that they have a strong merchandising strategy, which is, their pricing is tuned to the market out there. They have, competitive, pricing, competitive shipping policies, return policies. There's a lot of factors behind that, but that's an important factor we look at. And finally, we look at how the website looks, right? So the user experience. We want to make sure that customers can easily go through the website and get what they want, basically, in an easy and frictionless way, or as frictionless as possible. And which platform is it on? I mean, any platform can be optimized well for those. And at the same time, business decisions can be made on any of the platforms. Now, in terms of what's popular, where do we see demand from potential customers, or even existing customers? I would say Shopify is definitely a big one. We do like Shopify, and there are a few factors why we like it. One is it does have a very strong ecosystem for various plugins. So typically, as opposed to building something from scratch or asking a customer to build something from scratch, which may cost, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, they can buy a plugin for, 10, $20 a month, which is huge. And then they can make those decisions and they can kind of like implement them fairly, fairly quickly. Another big one why we like Shopify is that since Shopify grew so much, their checkout process is fairly recognized. So people do feel comfortable, or I guess slightly more comfortable, buying from a Shopify website. So those are kind of the two factors. Other platforms that we typically get are Magento. Now it's part of Adobe, BigCommerce, and WooCommerce. And then there's other category that all kinds of smaller platforms that, sometimes they could be custom, sometimes it could be like a modified ones, but there's a ton of them, but it's a lot of noise out there. It's like lots of one-offs. But I would say the biggest ones that we see every day are Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento, and WooCommerce.
You said Magento is owned by Adobe now?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I feel like we should do another episode on like Shopify plugins that you recommend. I mean, just thinking off the top of your head right now, we don't need to get into it, but with the Shopify clients, are there like a handful of those plugins that your team recommends as being helpful for your marketing activity?
We do have some, but only the ones that are related to product feed management and analytics. But as far as other plugins to improve the user experience, we typically rely on the developers who create those websites. It can open up a lot of can of worms if you do make a lot of recommendations and if the plugin doesn't work with the theme. So we don't want to get into that particular area and leave it to the developers. We may suggest a plugin that may work, but at the same time, we would rely on a developer to make sure that it's compatible, and if any modification needs to happen on the theme or within their checkout. Because for example, like Shopify Plus websites, they have custom checkouts, so they can have a lot of features that are not out of the box. So we would not touch any of those areas just because it's, it can open up a lot of problems. And we are not developers by trade.
On a monthly basis, how much spend are you managing?
I would say annually we do maybe 6 to 8 million a year, somewhere there.
So that's 500,000 a month. So it could be what, 5 to 700 a month or something, 5 to 800 a month, maybe.
Yeah. So I know that we have not reached $1 million a month yet, but somewhere in that range.
What's that process like? If someone was trying to, and maybe it's too hard for you to go over just off the cuff like this, but if somebody wanted to get into advertising e-commerce, either a young professional was desiring to become a part of your team or work for some other ad management agency, or let's say that like a client has an e-commerce website and they want to spend quite a bit of money either on Google or Facebook or whatever. How do you approach that? Like what has your team been trained to do? Like what is your process with SKU where it's like, all right, these guys want to spend $40,000 a month, $100,000 a month, something like that. Do you have a conversation with the client about where it's been spent in the past and how their campaigns are set up? How do you safeguard yourself against like a runaway day where you accidentally, or not? Let's say this doesn't happen to your company, but like I've heard stories of agencies where they've accidentally overspent every single day for like an entire week and racked up a high bill or something like that. What are just some smart practices for someone who wants to start spending a lot of money like that to not, let it get the best of them?
Good question. And maybe just a clarifying question for you, Paul. Is this company spending anything yet, or are they going from 0 to, let's say, 40 or 100,000?
Well, that's a good question. What kind of people do you work with? Do you only take on clients that have already been doing some spend for a while, or would you take on someone who, let's say they have the pockets for it, they've got deep pockets and they've got the revenue, but they've never initiated before? Would you say, you know what, we only like to work with people who've been doing some spend for a while, or would you create a brand new, like from scratch campaign for someone who's never spent? I guess yeah, it could go either way. Doesn't really matter. Just whatever you see the most of.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen all three scenarios, and I like to categorize those scenarios into kind of like three parts. One is a startup that has not spent anything, nor they have product to market fit. This is the hardest category. Number two is an established business with revenue and product to market fit, but no spend yet on digital platforms. Maybe they have relied on salespeople, word of mouth, referrals, or maybe some distribution, like third party distribution and so on. And finally, the third category would be businesses with spend and revenue and product to market fit. So we can go from the third to the first one. Let's kind of go the opposite way. So the business that has spent money already and has product to market fit and has revenue to kind of back up for it, it's easier to make decisions and it's easier to have forecasts on, because there's data that we can look at. And then based on that, we can identify opportunities to improve, opportunities to optimize to improve the profitability, and also identify opportunities for growth. So that's kind of like the first one. And the way we typically approach that is that we go through the goals with the client or potential client, and we identify the gap and where they are today versus where they need to be. And by gap, what I mean specifically is the metrics. So, for example, maybe if they're spending 20,000 and then they need to go, to 40 or 100,000, we need to understand what return on ad spend they expect and what's the baseline, meaning that what are they getting? But on top of that, we also want to make sure that we know other metrics, because of course, with the return on ad spend, we'll know attributed revenue, we'll know cost per click, we'll know conversion rate, average order value, and so on. So based on those metrics, we identify what needs to happen in order to spend, let's say, double or triple or 5 times more. Based on that, we identify what can be tweaked, meaning that which metrics can we tweak? Because what happens in most cases, if you're trying to scale an ad campaign, there are a few limitations. So the first limitation would be happening, the spend on your existing campaigns, on existing products, can tap out at a certain level, meaning that with every campaign, you're capturing a certain impression share, meaning that maybe out of, let's say, 100% of impressions, let's say right now you're getting 10, 20%. In order to spend more, you need to get to, let's say, 30 or 40% or 50%. Based on that, we try to calculate how much would traffic change. And what happens is that in most cases, you can drive more incremental traffic, but typically the cost of traffic goes up. So then we have a conversation on, can your conversion rates and can your average order value help to offset the additional cost of traffic? And also, how flexible are they on their goals? Meaning that if you're spending 20,000, let's say a month right now, maybe you're paying $2.50 a click. To get to 40, you may have to pay $3.50 a click. So there's a significant increase in that. And then if you want to maintain profitability, just be at the same return on ad spend, you want to make sure that the combination of conversion rate and average order value goes up by the same percentage as the cost of traffic increases. So that's one big conversation that we like to talk about and have a discussion on, because the typical challenge is that most businesses don't necessarily have a model that has enough of an increase in their average order value or conversion rate as the traffic increases. Actually, what's happening with the scaling, typically the conversion rate decreases because you're reaching new people who have never heard of your company. Therefore, the overall conversion rate typically goes down. Okay. So then you have to play on the average order value side. can you do more? Can you make other changes in order to essentially bump that up as much as possible in order to offset the difference? Now, smart businesses, what they do is that they also focus heavily on returning customers, because once you acquire those customers, you know that maybe the customer acquisition cost has gone up. Then they work on getting more repeat customers in order to offset that additional cost on those new customers. Those are the few things that we talk about on the with companies that have been spending and want to double and triple. And of course, when we talk about those numbers, we also have to ensure that there's an opportunity to spend more, right? So, and typically that comes in two different formats. So one is, as I mentioned before, are we tapping in, I guess, are we spending too much on the existing market, meaning that, are we, is the incremental traffic becoming too expensive? The other way to scale and spend more is to evaluate if they're introducing any new products, because new products typically open up another opportunity to drive additional traffic that is not kind of tapped out. Because, if it becomes too saturated, typically, then there's going to be an issue with more competition and so on. But if you're adding a new product, it gives you new opportunities to sell other products and therefore bring in additional traffic, which helps you with scaling. Those two particular ones are kind of like, expanding on the existing set, on the existing traffic, to, getting new traffic from new products. And typically three that we typically like to look at is, are there any opportunities from, let's say, keyword research or even, let's say, audience targeting that have not been tapped into, that we have not tapped into yet for the existing products or new products? And can we target those? That's kind of like a third area to look at and understand if there's an opportunity to spend more. And we like to have an honest conversation, because typically you just don't double overnight. We always scale incrementally and then see how the numbers play out. Because in some cases you can just double your budget and then you overspend and then there's nothing to show for at the end of the month. This is typically the worst case scenario. But if we increase the budget, let's say by 20% week over week, and then monitor the progress, how are we doing in terms of our return on ad spend? How is, attributed revenue looking like? Also, since we talked about this at the beginning, which is looking at Google Analytics 4 and also looking at the Shopify data, are we actually seeing more revenue coming through kind of like the total sales? Because today, I'd say all ad platforms, they're greedy for attributed revenue. So, people can allocate more money towards the ad spend. So we want to make sure we have to do the sanity check to really make sure that not just the attributed revenue, but also the actual revenue at the store level, like the total revenue, is increasing at the same level that we have seen the ad platforms are reporting. So that's the first big category, right? And it's, there's a lot more details, but this is off the cuff, and we can dive deeper into that because it's a big topic. If we talk about the second category, which is businesses who have revenue, who have product to market fit, but have not done anything before, the process is very similar, but these companies don't have the baseline. So what we always like to do is we always like to test smaller. So and also identify an opportunity for the best selling and the most successful product categories. So typically a couple different steps. One is, for example, if we're saying, all right, well, we want to get to, let's say, 40,000 or 100,000. We would break that up into smaller chunks and allocate a certain test budget. So maybe start with 10,000. And based on that, identify what the metrics are based on their previous website, just kind of like previous organic campaigns and like the overall business metrics. As an example, what their average order value will be fairly consistent across the board, unless we drastically change something about the business and what we advertise, right? So that's going to be one thing that we need to lock in, and I don't think it's going to change that much. Number two is the conversion rate. And typically we would want to take, organic search conversion rate, because it's different compared to, let's say, direct, which may be, either untracked revenue or people typing in your website address into the browser. It might be returning customers, so we would not want to use that. So typically search, like organic search conversion rate, can be a good metric to have, right? Because they don't have any baseline. And at least we're using some sort of like more realistic data to do a proper calculation, kind of like a proper model for a rough forecast, at least the goals to establish for that 10K ad spend. Then, of course, we do the keyword research to identify, one is like, what the opportunity is, how much traffic we have for those product categories, and two, what is the cost of traffic. So based on that figure, we can plug that in and then understand, for this type of ad spend, I'm going to get this much traffic within that conversion rate that we have. And with that, we're going to get this many orders. Within this many orders, where we know that the average order value is X, we're going to get this much revenue. Therefore, we are going to generate this much revenue for that particular ad spend. And then, of course, based on that, we can calculate what the cost of acquisition is, pretty much the cost per order, and also what the return on the ad spend is, which is basically revenue divided by ad spend. Based on that, we can have a conversation with the client and then, talk about their gross profit margin to see if that type of margin, based on their profit margin, if that type of return on ad spend really makes sense for their business. In some cases it doesn't, in some cases it does. But having that conversation and then seeing if there's wiggle room within any of those areas to improve, because if the numbers don't make sense, we have to figure out a way to improve, which is, if the average order value is too low, it's a merchandising strategy question that needs to be solved through, either selling higher quantities of items, bundling things, cross sells, upsells, different ways to do it. If it's a conversion rate issue, it's typically the website issue, it's the product page, the checkout process, and we can go into a deep rabbit hole there, just talking about the conversion rate. And if there's a cost of traffic, which is the cost per click, then of course we need to see at what scale and how much can we spend based on the cost per click that we need to be at. Because the market dictates the cost per click, which is really who are you going against. If there's a lot of competition, the cost per click will be higher. If there's low competition, the cost per click will be lower. So in all of those cases, we need to see which metric needs to be adjusted, and then what do we do from there. Once we have that model, of course, we would launch campaigns, with, we would manage them. We would look at KPIs every week, adjust, and then based on that, seeing how close are we to the goals, and then adjust from there, basically. So that's the second category. The first category, which is typically a startup with no previous ad spend, no product to market fit, and no spend, no product to market fit, no revenue, basically. The process would be very similar to the second category, which is we need to understand the opportunity, which is doing the keyword research, finding out how much traffic there is. Now, we don't know what the average order value is, and also we don't know what the conversion rate is in most cases. We need to do research, and we need to make a lot of assumptions. But at the same time, the reason why I'm saying this is probably the most challenging is that we can be wrong based on our assumptions more often than we would, compared to those other two cases, because we may be thinking that the website maybe is converting at that rate, but maybe it's converting at maybe a quarter of that. And it does require a lot more changes, and typically a lot more changes on the merchandising strategy. Could be the website user experience, messaging, a lot of factors that could play into it. And typically improve that and I guess start spending a lot of money is a lot more challenging. And typically it takes a lot more time, because typically within that, you just can't go from 0 to 100,000. You typically validate the initial assumptions. So typically what we typically suggest is that we establish goals to have a break-even point based on the ad spend and based on your gross profit margin. Once you get there, then say, what can you do? what else can you do? Because it's not just going to be about the ads. It's going to be about a lot of business changes. Because like you're getting traffic, you're getting live feedback, but you don't know how the market will react. It's like almost like bringing up like having a new product and then bringing a bunch of people to the store. If a lot of them walk out without telling you what the feedback is, well, tough, out of luck, and especially if they don't buy. So those are the three different approaches for I guess three different categories of businesses. Where we excel at and where we like to be at is typically established businesses with product to market fit with revenue, and then whether they are spending money or are not spending, where we like to help those companies first. We do take on maybe 1 to 2 startups a year only. And we have to validate those startups much more closer compared to any other company. And we also have to validate the founder, because it does require a lot of business decisions. And we want to make sure that whoever's behind the wheel in those companies can make those decisions, has the right experience to really navigate through that. Because it's tough to start a new business. And we get, I think that a lot of startups, they do think that advertising will solve all of their problems, but in reality, it won't. There's a lot of factors that into play, and everybody has to make those changes, and that's what matters most.
Advertising will create new problems. It'll create financial problems.
It will.
Right?
It will. Yeah. Or it will expose your product, or maybe like expose the thought process on what you maybe didn't know about the product. Maybe you thought that you're selling the best thing since sliced bread, but people saw that, and like if nobody's buying, or if everybody's saying it's too expensive, or if some people bought it and it's saying that it's broken, or it's like it doesn't serve the purpose, then that there's an issue with the product itself, and it's not necessarily the advertising. So, but I would say that what I've seen is that the most successful companies have all of the aspects dialed in.
When you sit down with a startup, they've got their product together, they've got a couple sales, a couple of customers, that kind of thing, and they want to go big, and they want to spend a lot of money on advertising and have you manage it. You mentioned a minute ago that there's kind of like a vetting process to getting to know whoever's running the show to see if they're experienced enough or capable enough to make certain decisions and to do a good job. Is that a conversation you have with them? Is that something that you discuss with your team internally? How do you feel that out? How do you decide, if these guys really have what it takes to, to make you feel comfortable getting into a big contract with them versus maybe you saying, thanks for your time, guys, but now is not the right time for this?
Always have a conversation, sometimes multiple conversations. A few big things that we like to discuss when we talk to those potential clients, I guess more particularly startups. We really talk about the goals, and that typically reveals a lot about what they know and what they don't. Some startups, they just say, "Hey, I just basically need to make more money," and that's it. And you'll notice that companies that or founders that do know their stuff well, they'll know their margins, they'll know the accounting side, they'll have more assumptions about what to expect. They'll have a better roadmap for what's next for the business. Because typically, a telltale, for someone who's inexperienced is that they'll typically have, let's say, one product or maybe a couple products. They will have somewhat of a vague goal, and they'll say like, I want to scale as much as possible. What I've seen more successful companies is that they'll have some sort of financial plan, and that they'll know, here's the current state, here's where they want to be at, here are the profit margins, here's what the roadmap for from kind of customer acquisition, and what's going to happen next with those customers. Are they what are they going to do with those customers? Because in most cases, if you just have a one product or a few product business, you don't necessarily have a business, unless maybe you got lucky and that particular product has a lot of demand and You got a patent for it, so you're very special in the marketplace for that particular product. But in most cases, people don't have that, and you can be copied tomorrow by your competitors. And if you don't have any competitive advantage, then you're in trouble. So typically a product roadmap, basically evidence of a merchandising strategy, also, do they have any competitive advantage? Like, what's your unique selling proposition and their value proposition compared to what's out there in the marketplace? Have they thought about that, or are they just say like, hey, I'm just starting to sell this product because I thought it was a good idea, and then I have no idea if I'm competitive against others or not. Typically, those companies will say, hey, here's my angle. I'm going to be the cheapest one out there. I'm going to be maybe like the most premium. And based on this, I can tell that, I've secured like the best manufacturer with the best materials and so on. And I know that why I'm going to be positioned that particular way. Also, another factor that we would look at is that, what does their financial situation look like? Can they carry on if, for example, stuff does not work out the way we have all anticipated? Because in some cases you may be thinking, all right, well, I need to, I'm going to present this product to the market. And if they don't buy at the rate that we want to, and we will need 3 to 6 months to really solve it, do they have enough cash in the bank to find that product to market fit, or tweak the product, tweak the messaging, and test it to really make sure that we can get to that product to market fit first, and to get to that break even point first. So, and finally, even checking their level of commitment to the company personally. Are they doing this full time? Did they commit, or this is their part-time gig, and then they have a full-time job, and then they'll do it on a weekend, and then as soon as the first set of trouble comes in, and they'll say like, let's just fold this project and then not do it anymore. So I think that those are the few big categories that do matter, and those are the ones that we do discuss with those companies. Now, in some cases, and actually, it's funny, I received an email from a company. It was not a startup; it was a somewhat young company with product to market fit, with sales and everything, but it needed a tweak. Some things needed to be tweaked, and they. We have had a conversation a few months ago, and I explained the issues, why they're not meeting their goals, why their previous agent or existing or previous agency, they were not meeting their goals. And I said, you need to fix the business problems first. Just saw an update today that he fixed all of those, and then after he fixed those business issues, which was more like confusion related to the product messaging and also the website experience, which is like, it was kind of confusing once you send traffic to that website. He came back and he said that he's ready. He wants to start. So it took me like maybe 5 to 6 months or so, of having a break and him fixing the issues to come back to say that he's ready now. So we typically like to say, hey, here's what we feel is missing. Work on that first, then come back to us, and then we can reinitiate the conversation. See if there's a better fit today based on the new conditions that your business has. Or in some cases, if we just don't see a fit, we just don't see a fit. I like to be blunt with people and just like to explain what the reasons are. And that's it, basically. And then sometimes they do come back, sometimes they don't. But at the same time, if business has some glaring issues, we want them to fix those first, because that's typically the priority versus spending money on ads, because you can spend a lot of money on ads and you can fail quickly. And if we do see that there's the likelihood of failing is there, and I guess it's imminent, we say don't spend the money, fix the issues first. And then once you fix those issues first, then we can start saying, if you should spend some money on the ads.
Not a good idea to force something if it's not a good fit. So that's good that you have that approach. And that takes experience and maturity, and obviously your agency's been around for a while. You've got that sort of comfort zone where you can pick and choose who you're going to work with based on all these parameters.
I'd say one important thing that is helpful to make more clear-headed decisions is to have enough in the pipeline that you're not desperate to close the deal or to close any deals like today, like that you need to close that deal. And it does require pre-work on your side to make sure that your marketing and sales function is effective. That gives you the freedom to be a bit choosier which companies you want to work with. And also, you want to make sure that it does fit with your vision in terms of what type of businesses you want to work with. I'm a big believer in specialization and then understanding business categories we work with that help us to add more value quickly. Because if you just jump around from one business model to another, or like one industry to another, the learning curve can be very, very costly and expensive, both for you and your clients. So if you're used to one business model or, a few sets of companies where you excel at and then you jump into something completely new, it can be challenging. And I think that having a clear vision for the company, knowing like, here are the companies that we are working with, here are the companies we're not working with, makes it a lot easier to make a decision on rejecting companies that are not a good fit.
So where can people find you?
You can find me on our website, scoobmarketing.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. So it's linkedin.com/Tom Bukevicius. And you can find me there. I'm not very active on any other platforms right now. So those are the two ones that you can find me and connect with me.